Thanks for tuning in to the Women's Vibrancy Code, a podcast dedicated to helping women move from exhausted to energized, balance their hormones, and feeling turned on by their life, their lover, and themselves. I'm your host, Maraya Brown. I'm a Yale and functional medicine trained women's health expert, midwife, mom, keynote speaker, and self-made entrepreneur. I'm the founder of my signature program, the Women's Vibrancy Code. So sit back, relax, and let's chat about your energy, hormones, libido, and embracing your feminine power. Oh, and you might want to have pen and paper to take some notes on some of these episodes. I have the authors of two books that are near and dear to my heart. They are called Wild Power and Wise Power. They founded an organization called Red School. So Alexandra Pope and Sjanie, can you pronounce your last name for me, Sjanie?
Hugo Wurlitzer.
Wurlitzer. Hugo Wurlitzer. Okay, that's a tongue twister for me, and I can do it. And they're joining from the UK, and I'm here in Oregon. So we found just the perfect time to have this conversation. Welcome, both of you.
Thank you so much for having us, Maraya.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh my gosh, I have so many questions, but and I'm going to put your bios and everything in the description. For those of you listening now, I would just say this is really worth a listen. If you are a woman, if you are menstruating, if you are done menstruating, if you are irregularly menstruating, if you sometimes feel like, gosh, this week I feel so different than last week. Or there are times when my emotions feel so strong. There are times that I really just want to be quiet and by myself. And there are times when I am ready to be out in the world. For women that are navigating perimenopause into menopause and beyond, and it feels like a stretching recalibration. I often say we're the caterpillar into the chrysalis and we've become goo. This interview is for you. So first, Alexandra and Sjanie, I'm curious, just a little bit of background. What is your background? How did Wild Power and Wise Power and Red School, where did that come from originally? That's a loaded question, I'm sure.
Yeah, exactly. Whoa. Well, I mean, just to sort of in general terms, my background is education and then psychotherapy. I became a psychotherapist and I had a psychotherapy practice for 25 years. Or 20 years, I can't remember now, it's a blur. That was back in the mists of time. But this work came through, well, I actually like to say I came in with this work, I think. And I've been tapped into something both unwittingly and then wittingly from my very first bleed, and I don't know, something happened at my very first bleed at the age of 14. And I just felt 10 feet tall when I discovered the blood. I was at boarding school, no, I didn't get any positive messages, nothing. But I knew what was happening. And I just remember the light, and it almost I feel teary thinking about it now. It's just such an imprinting on my soul of a kind of like a yes to my being, because at Menarche you're wide open, and whatever is happening at Menarche, what you sort of encounter at that time is imprinted on you. And I was imprinted with this sense of bigness and light, and something must have woken up in me. I don't know what it was, but anyway, so I am a little old 14-year-old, totally innocent, going about my business in the world, being a 14-year-old. And I then grow up and go into my 20s. And in my 20s, I briefly dally with the pill, and then I go, no. And I learn about fertility awareness. So through my 20s, I'm grounded in fertility awareness, and I found that very empowering. But I did not understand anything more about it, except that I did read one book called The Wise Wound, which is really seminal, that sort of planted seeds in my head. But it was just before my 31st birthday. So I had until this point normal bleeds, no problems, nothing. And then just before my 31st birthday, I had by this time moved to Australia and was living in Australia. I got the menstrual pain from hell. Fancy that. And this pain came back month after month. And this pain lasted not just for a couple of hours, a few hours, it could last up to 4 days.
Wow.
Normally 3 days, but sometimes 4. And the pain was insane. It was just, it was hell on earth. And I made this radical decision because I was not into drugs and surgery and stuff. I was already into natural things. And I just made this radical decision. It came out of nowhere almost. I said, my body is talking to me and I'm going to listen. And
Mm.
then I stepped into this great odyssey, this great quest, but I am at this point unwitting. I am, little do I know that, 40 years later, I'd be, this would be my business, which I teach, people all over the world. There I was sweating it out each month with this pain because I would go cold turkey with the pain as much as I could because, I had a day job, I had to go to work and stuff, but somehow my cycle was regular. That was great. I could plan for the pain. And, but I gave space. What that meant was I gave space to menstruation. I decided to really listen in and give space for my body to do what it was doing and to really kind of just go listen into it. And there's a whole story there about how I did heal, of course. So I won't go into the details of that. I write about it actually in my very first book called Wild Genie. And but out of that experience, it was like the veils started falling from my eyes. And I'm talking about time here, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years of just really staying close to my cycle and practicing, what we call now menstrual cycle awareness, which isn't just charting your fertile signs. It's much bigger than that. And it's as though my body was guiding me, Maraya, into back into back into this knowledge that was not named or valued in our culture, that the knowledge that our menstrual cycles are this extraordinary, it is a spiritual path and practice.
Mm-hmm.
Menstrual cycle awareness is a spiritual path and practice, but that at menstruation one could enter these extraordinary altered states, and it was like being seized. I often think of is it Persephone who's seized by Hades, taken down into the underworld. I felt like when the pain came, it was like the underworld seizing me and pulling me
Mm-hmm.
right down into the core of my being. Because I would go without the drugs, and I would just face this pain, and I would go into myself, and then I would be reborn after it. And it was this
Mm.
movement month after month, year after year of just really coming in and close. And of course, my symptoms reduced. And the more they reduced, the more I had the pleasure of menstruation instead of the trauma. But it was like
Mm-hmm.
menstruation was saying, honey, you got to learn some things. We've got some things to teach you. And the only way we're going to get your attention is we're going to give you a
Yeah.
very clear signal.
It's fascinating because I think often, um, I ran the women's health in lots of places for a couple decades, and it seemed like the bleeding time was just a nuisance for some women, or it's only seen in the context of I want to get pregnant or I don't want to get pregnant, or I have pain or I don't have pain. And so often it's like, well, why didn't you just go on the pill?
I know. I know.
And so
And
why didn't you? Why didn't you just take the easy way out and just go on the pill?
it was not my way. It's not,
Yeah.
I, 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 I I had a calling and I listened. I'm kind of proud of myself, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, that I just knew drugs and surgery weren't the answer.
Yeah.
No. So
It makes me think of the book The Body Keeps the Score. You know,
yeah,
my body was talking to me and I listened.
yes, yeah.
Yeah, to go, this is this is this is a message and this is a chance for me to listen inside, go inside. And what I'm hearing is the liberation and the pride and the self-awareness that's on the other side feels
Mm.
really big.
It's very beautiful the way you're feeding it back to me, Maraya. I'm feeling
Mm,
quite touched by it. Yeah, yeah. I am
mm,
proud of myself for staying the course. It was an initiation. I mean, it was a trial by fire. And you're right, I could have opted out. And actually, when I was in the pain, I'd be going, "Where's that surgeon?" You know, if there was a handy surgeon passing, I'd have yanked them off the street. So just whip this out because it was
yeah,
safe. But then I would come out of it and something, yeah, yeah.
yeah.
But
It's
anyway,
in, you know, in birth, it's like, where's it? Can't I just have the epidural?
yes,
Yeah.
yes,
But
And
but the
usually that cry comes at a moment when it's all too late, right?
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
It's so
Or
classic in birth when you've actually reached that point of it's too late to have an epidural. And that's the
yeah.
moment that most people go, just give me the epidural.
Or it's the time when things really get real.
Yeah.
You
mm,
know, that time of transition,
Yeah.
um, right around 8 centimeters, there's a surge of adrenaline.
Mm.
And I think that some women feel the adrenaline. And is it fear? Is it excitement? What is this? And it's that time. I mean, this is a totally different topic, but as a midwife, I actually have watched, I feel like it's a point where, um, my feeling is that a woman's soul kind of goes up into the ethers, connects with the baby. They make some agreements and then they come back together. And that's happening during transition. There's almost a feeling where I see their eyes kind of go to another place. And then they come back in and a woman is so present and there's this roar and then there's the pushing. Anyway. Um,
Well, actually, can I just come in and say this is not disconnected at all, Maraya? This
okay.
is utterly connected to the education that our cycle um, grows in us. I mean, this is what is that pattern you're talking about happens in the menstrual cycle. That
Mhm.
exact pattern, we call it, if you look at the map of the menstrual cycle that we've laid out in the inner seasons, there is that moment before bleeding, which we call the void. It's the first chamber of menstruation, which is exactly that moment of transition in birth. And it's the moment when we are in our most expanded, most vulnerable, most exposed state. And it's the place where we can either flip into completely freaking out. Some people feel suicidal, some people lose it, some people have, real profound catharsis or turn to addiction in those moments in the menstrual cycle. Or if we have some sense of presence with ourselves, it's the moment of profound connection with something other before we drop into that union of the bleed that comes next. It's mirrored in the birth process exactly as you're describing.
Mm.
amazing, amazing.
Wow. Wow. And so what I'm hearing is, you know, most of us have heard the term PMS, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I'm in my PMS time. And so I would love for you to speak a little bit about this kind of the inhale, the exhale, the expansion, the contraction, the inward and the outward, and what is happening during that quote unquote PMS time. And then also what I'm hearing is right at the end of what we call our PMS time, you're speaking of a void that's like that transition into when the bleed actually begins. Can you just speak a little bit more to this?
Mm, yeah. So, Alexandra, how shall we begin with this? Shall we talk about the energy dynamic of the cycle just to kind of map this out a little?
I think so, Shani. Yes, yes,
Mm.
yeah. Mm.
Yeah, because you spoke about that inhale, exhale. So the menstrual cycle pattern is this pattern of activity and rest, which is this movement from menstruation, which is, of course, the moment of kind of deep innerness and rest and inwardness, to that place of ovulation, which is the place of expansion and outwardness and like the highest peak of energy. So we're cycling between those two poles. We think of those as the poles of the menstrual cycle, the two places of sort of stability and arrival. And we're moving from one pole, menstruation, to the other, ovulation, through this transition, which is the pre-ovulatory phase as we're coming up to ovulation, and then the premenstrual phase as we're coming back to menstruation. So you've got these two pillars of stability, and then you've got this kind of these two transitional moments between them. And this is the kind of abiding underlying dynamic that we're moved through month after month. And it's most obvious really in our energy levels. Everyone noticed this, feeling more tired at menstruation and feeling generally more energized and full of energy at ovulation. And there's something about the amount of energy that we have that profoundly affects how we experience ourselves and also how we perceive the world, and the kinds of skills and capacities we have access to very, very, very much through this dynamic. And generally speaking, we feel much more vulnerable when we're tired. We feel much more permeable and much less buffered against the vicissitudes and challenges of our lives, and much less buffered against our own criticism, we could even say, and the criticism of others. Whereas when we have more energy, we tend to feel more resilient, more buoyant, more capable. Things bounce off us more, much more like water off a duck's back. So we're kind of cycling between those two poles in our psyche and in our being each month. So, Alexandra, do you want to pick up from there? And because I really liked your question, Maraya, around sort of what's happening there premenstrually, that it's being kind of labeled as PMS and sort of pathologized. Yeah.
Yeah. And for those, just thank you. For those listening, I imagine some are saying, well, I'm already in menopause. Does this apply to me? Or I'm on birth control. Does this apply to me? And I don't mean to interrupt.
No, let's just hold those questions because they're really important, actually, both of them in different ways. I'd just like to sort of ride off the back of what Sjanie was saying there. So when you're in the first half of the cycle, the pre-ovulatory time, that current of energy from menstruation up to ovulation is this energy of growth and expansion. It's like a filling out. It's we relate the phases of the cycle to the seasons of the year. So we talk about menstruation as the inner winter, where we're all hunkered down and don't want to go out. And then that spring energy, which of course is now in the Northern Hemisphere, just starting to court us very, very slightly, which is very glorious. And it is that feeling of possibility and hope that returns, with spring. And we have that within us every month. So there's this lovely rising energy. And we think of it as like an inner yes to our being. It's just like being filled up and sort of, expanded. And it brings possibility and hope. And this word, I love this idea of the inner yes. And we talk about the first half of the cycle as like healthy ego development. It's like we're being filled up and fluffed out, fluffing our feathers. So by the time we get to ovulation, there's a real sense of being on top of the world in ourselves, if we have been able to rest well and not overstretched or stressed in our lives. And this is really important, to have this feeling of feeling good about yourself and proud, and it's a real sense almost too of invincibility, actually, which I think we all secretly like to have. And so it's good, strong, healthy ego development. And then in the second half of the cycle, the wheel turns. And it is the return, from that pinnacle of being out there and having lots of energy and capacity and so on. The wheel turns. and we are sort of brought into ourselves. Our energies will just drop a little, and some of the shine of that summer energy will go. And yes, you can relate it to the season of the year, with leaves starting to fall off the trees. There's a withdrawing inwards. Now, people might think, oh, why can't I just stay up there in ovulation all the time? Well, too much sun creates a desert, basically. We would burn out, which is what happens when we just try to keep going and ignore these organic rhythms. And we can see that played out in the day-night rhythm. If you don't get a good night's sleep, how shitty you feel afterwards. So it's a sort of parallel with the cycle. So there's this drawing inwards. And this is where, if we can't let ourselves follow that natural kind of movement in, so there's a slight drop in energy and we suddenly find we can't do everything we want to do, and we've probably overcommitted ourselves. And if we're a yes person, it's going to be very hard to say no to people, because this is where you start to discover your boundaries. You just start to discover what your energy is actually like, how your nervous system is like, how you're actually doing. So you're starting to check in with yourself. You basically, in the ovulatory phase, you are least connected to yourself at that time. You have really no idea of your boundaries, because frankly, you're invincible.
Right? It's all external.
Yeah, it's that superwoman stuff. You are invincible. But then you discover, as you come into the second half of the cycle, that you are human. And, we humans, we're vulnerable. We get tired. We can't keep going forever and ever and ever. And we have to recalibrate, and we have to check in with ourselves. And if we're not able to make that transition and start to be with that more vulnerable energy in us, it can come out as reactivity. And it can come out, if you suddenly find yourself getting irritable and angry with everyone around you, it is a sure sign that, it's a sure sign of a number of things, but that you need time and space for yourself, that you've suddenly overspent, you've overdrawn the bank account of your energy, and you need to just be with yourself more. And so it's telling you about your needs, it's telling you about your energy levels. And if you're practicing what we call menstrual cycle awareness, you start to pace all this, so that when you start to come into your autumn, this is the premenstrual phase. We call it the inner autumn.
Yep. Just so that you know, in my podcast, I refer to the chapters of the cycle with the seasons too. So this is very familiar.
Oh, good. Great.
I love it. I'm leaning in.
It's almost inevitable that you will feel a shift, and that's not good or bad. It's just, it's the wheel turning. I mean, especially when you're coming off that high of the inner summer, you'll suddenly feel a clunk, possibly. And it's just an invitation to recalibrate what you're doing. Yeah. And Sjanie, you come in here because, of course,
I just want to say, I mean, it is an entirely different mode of being, the second half of the cycle, and it requires valuing different parts of yourself and allowing yourself to be different to how you were a week or so ago. The second half of the cycle is actually really asking you to tend your inner life, and to really reflect on how you're doing. I mean, and this happens organically. The premenstruum, we often call it the feedback time in the menstrual cycle. It gives you feedback on your overall health, on the state of your nervous system, on the state of your relationship and whether it's working or not, how your job, career, stroke, calling is going. The big unsolved or difficult things in your life all surface in the premenstruum. And what makes it the feedback time is that you are coming into connection with yourself. You really are coming into what really matters and what's really true. And if we aren't conscious of that, and if we're not willing to kind of shift gear and drop the doing to really come into more of a place of being and embodiment with ourselves, we are just feeling the reactivity or the like, I'm so sick and tired of my partner, or my job is pointless, or I hate my life. We're just in all the no, no, no of it, all the reactivity of it. And we aren't able to feel the truth that's coming from our being, which is like, okay, there's more refinement needed here. There's more course correction required. There's more self-care needed. We're getting all this really wise guidance from our cycle. And because the menstrual cycle isn't valued, and because people aren't really honoring the different phases of the menstrual cycle, this whole phase of the premenstruum just isn't held with dignity. It's kind of, we're often just dismissed as being kind of over emotional, hypersensitive, irrational, etc. But the truth is, we aren't rational in the way we are in the first half of the cycle, but we're coming into this deep intuitive knowing in ourselves. We're dropping into this different kind of intelligence, and it's power, actually, is what it is. We're waking up to power in ourselves. And power never announces itself kindly or lightly or gently.
I'm just sitting here relishing, because I think for the last year I've listened to Wild Power and Wise Power multiple times. And so I'm hearing your voices, and they feel very familiar. They've been in my bedroom, they've been in my office, and even my 9-year-old daughter, she'll say, "Mom, can we listen to that power book?"
Oh, no, really?
She has not started her menstruation, but she's curious. And I just want to say thank you. And for those of you listening, I just have to say right away, if you're in your menstruating years, Wild Power is a beautiful, spectacular book to read and reread. And for those of you transitioning into perimenopause and menopause, Wise Power is just as potent. Okay, so as you were talking, it reminded me of the concepts, what I hear around the inner critic.
Yeah.
And I love what both of you say around the role of the inner critic, the power of the inner critic during this time. I'm curious if you'd speak a little bit to that.
Yes.
So glad you asked that.
Speaking of power, yes, enter stage left, the critic. Well, we came to a knowing about the inner critic. It happened actually on the very first training we ever ran in 2011. I'd been teaching on the inner critic for years. It was sort of bread and butter part of my work as a psychotherapist. This is basically what you're wrestling with all the time. And but I had such a revelation on that first training, where I really suddenly had this whole new insight and respect for this critical figure. I saw it. Actually, I'm going to say the punchline, and then we'll kind of work backwards from there. But I really saw this inner critic as the great awakener, just waking us up to ourselves. I sometimes refer to it as the 13th fairy, in Sleeping Beauty. The beautiful princess, baby princess, is getting all these glorious blessings to have the most exquisite, magnificent, wonderful, perfect life. And they deliberately keep the old hag away. But she gets in, the 13th fairy, and she swings in with the wind and the leaves coming in behind her, and curses this baby, you're going to die. And of course, you're going to prick your finger and die. And of course, that is actually a story about menarche, the very first bleed, because that's what it is. It's that. And of course, the baby has to, the baby will grow up and then will prick her finger at whatever age, teenager, and start bleeding. And it is the moment where you start to wake up to something more in yourself, because you're in a kind of bubble of innocence. So in our lives, we're like that. We go along in this kind of bubble of illusion about ourselves, and our critics come in to puncture that illusion. And this happens we talk about the inner critic having a natural home in the menstrual cycle, where it has a very specific job. It lives in the premenstrual phase, the inner autumn, which is, of course, everyone will recognize, as Sjanie referred to it, where we start getting very critical about ourselves and everybody else around us. I mean, no one can get anything right, you know. And if we're not dishing it out to others, we'll be dishing it out to ourselves and feeling crap about ourselves and, like, you know, hopeless, or, you know, we're no good at anything, whatever. It's the usual thing. So it's this judgmental energy, and obviously that is not good. And we have to, this damning of ourselves and damning of others, it has to be met and challenged. And this is the point of the inner critic. I always say it's prodding you to see if you're awake. And it's basically it's asking you to step up to something more, Maraya, because when criticism happens, we can either react and get all aggressive back, or we collapse and go into shame, a kind of shame spiral. And actually, they're sort of very similar, those two, just whether it goes outwards or inwards. Or we can see this critical force as an invitation to step up to something bigger in ourselves, to learn something about ourselves, or, I don't know, there's something in the process of meeting that figure, of deciding what is true and not true within it, because there'll always be a kernel of truth in it. And it is in the act of engaging with that figure in a sort of deliberate, conscious way. And my God, it's hard to do this. This does not happen overnight, folks. Please remember this. But if one can learn to turn and meet this energy and bring as much, I mean, you've got to hold a lot of kindness towards yourself, but meet the criticism and work with it. And we describe this in great detail in both our books. We go into a lot of detail, so I can only give you a sort of top slicing here of something. You are going to grow. The critic's here to grow you, basically. Sjanie, you come in.
Well, just to kind of land that within the menstrual cycle context, Alexandra started by talking about the revelation that happened at that first training, was actually that you know how we feel critical in the premenstruum. So the revelation was that actually the critic has a natural home. It has a place. It serves its purpose. And in fact, the criticism, the critical energy that we feel in the premenstruum is not a problem. There's nothing wrong with us. It's not something we have to try and stop from happening. It's there with great purpose. It's there to, as Alexandra said, really pull us into ourselves and get us to take our own side and to kind of find a new kind of power and authority in ourselves. Because when we meet criticism, when we meet it well, we're actually claiming ourselves. That's what's happening. Yes. We're claiming ourselves. And that is so necessary in order to then come into menstruation in a way that we can really receive the gifts of it. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's part of the whole process of preparing you for menstruation, preparing you to receive the blessings and gifts of menstruation, which are aplenty, but we need to be at home in ourselves in order to receive that. Yeah.
So powerful. I wrote down it's a prodding you to see if you're awake.
Yes.
And also getting clarity on what's true and not true. But what I'm hearing is it's the internal, like what is true and not true for me.
Exactly.
For my deep sense of my longing, my essence, not in the external ovulation time where all the lights are outside and the focus is outside, but what is true and not true for my essence.
Exactly.
And we're talking about it in the context of bleeding, but what about for a woman who is in her 40s, her 50s, her bleeding is becoming irregular, she's transitioned into menopause. Um, it's striking for me. I've heard that the highest rates of both suicide and divorce are
Mm-hmm.
for women in this transitional, like the crux of the transition into menopause.
Mm-hmm.
And that is heavy for me.
Mm-hmm.
It is.
And so then I'm curious, like, is it the inner critic? What is happening in this time? And then once again, well, then people say, well, just everyone needs to be on hormone replacement therapy. Everybody needs to be on bioidentical hormones because your hormones are gone. And I'm curious if you could speak around the kind of the inner critic and what is happening for the woman who is saying, well, I don't have a normal menstrual cycle every month. It's once every 3 months. It's once every 9 months. It's completely gone away. And where is my inner critic now?
Everywhere is the answer.
Everywhere. Yeah.
Mm.
It doesn't, there's no container for it. And this is a huge question, Maraya, and I'm going to try and respond in a way that is not too, is sort of digestible. um, and Sjanie, perhaps you could sort of summarize, because if I get too big here. All right. So in our work, we are trying, our aim is to restore the deeper spiritual process that is at work at menopause, that we regard menopause as this great awakening. It's an extraordinary pinnacle moment of evolution in our psyches. It's extraordinary. There is nothing else like it. And it is, menopause is a huge death and rebirth, but on a very large scale. We are taken into the core of ourselves in the way we have never been before. It's extraordinary. I hear it over and over again. One way of sort of describing menopause is you go into the inner winter of your soul for a while. It is, it's the end of your menstruating years. So in your 40s, you're sort of in the autumn of your menstruating years, where those autumnal powers that we describe of the premenstruum are amplified more. So in your 40s, your inner critic is going to get louder and louder just overall, because you are in the autumn phase of your cycling life. And this is actually, interestingly, so it's really important to meet that critical energy in your 40s. We call the perimenopause the quickening. You're in the quickening. Something's really heating up now. Your spiritual journey is heating up, you see. And this inner critic work is very central to that spiritual journey of calling you into presence. It's calling you into presence because you can't afford not to be present when you arrive at the door of menopause proper, when you are really in the death and rebirth part.
Yeah, so just like the premenstruum prepares you to enter the power of menstruation, your 40s, the kind of years leading up to menopause are really preparing you to come present for this initiation of menopause. It's a lot like preparing for a ceremony or a very special event. It requires real mindfulness to enter that and to really show up for it in a way that you can make yourself available to what's happening. Yeah.
I'm always also thinking around fall. I watch all the squirrels really busy
Yeah.
gathering their acorns.
Yeah.
Yes.
You watch in nature the preparation
Yeah.
for
Exactly.
for hibernation, for a time where the
Mm.
snow will come.
Mm.
And yeah. And I'm 46. And so I'm there in it and feeling it
Ah,
and
you are.
yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to pick up now this piece of really what happens in menopause and this, what you brought up around the divorce rates and
Yeah. And
suicide.
suicide rates.
Yeah, it's very shocking, deeply distressing.
Yeah.
And Yes, and we know of people personally who, who have died. So
Yeah, just a
we're
nice
coming.
breath there, huh?
Yeah.
Just everyone listening, just take a breath. Like I feel the body chills,
Mm.
um, and the emotion, and just to send love and energy out to all women. But if you are listening and you're in this phase of just feeling like I don't recognize myself, it's all turning, I don't know, and you're having thoughts of ending it, I just want you to know that you are loved and it's okay. And I'm hoping that you will really listen to what's about to be said. Mm-hmm.
Just following on from that, I'm going to say I'm actually going to do a plug for our book Wise Power, because we wrote this book as we imagined it as a vessel holding women going through menopause, as when they're facing this moment where they just want to just check out from everything and go. And we put it into a context and give it meaning. And the book truly can travel with you and hold you through this, because that moment where you feel, my life feels over, and you just feel there's nothing there, like you lose interest. Like your job, which was meaningful, suddenly it does not hold meaning. Nothing holds meaning. But worse than that, you're only seeing the shadow side of yourself. You're really coming into the underbelly of yourself, the shadow of yourself. And because menopause is not framed as a sacred rite of passage,
Mm.
it's so heartbreaking, because it's not named as that. It feels like we're falling off the end of the world, and it is the end, and that meaningful, purposeful life has come to an end, when in fact, listen up everybody, you're just getting going. Now really, hear me. You are just getting going. And menopause is actually, the mission of menopause is to liberate you into your true self. But to find that true self, you have to, and I'm going back to the image of me with my menstrual pain and Hades seizing me and taking me down into the underworld. That's what's happening. You're being taken from the topside world with all your identities and the stuff you have in your life and your family and everything. And menopause is saying, sorry, we're going to take you. You can't be, to find your true self, you've got to pull away from everything, because to really know what you're about. And that initial sort of dive into the depths feels like hell. And we call that first phase of menopause, actually we call it betrayal, and we talk about it as hell and heaven, because you've got, heaven is actually there with you. But initially it just feels like, well, it's death. And so it just goes dark. It goes meaningless. It goes pointless. And also because your body is changing, your energy probably has completely gone. And remember what we were saying about when your energy drops, you become more vulnerable. You don't have the same resilience. So it's a kind of perfect storm of everything coming together. And this is really fertile soil for your inner critic, because you have no buffers to the critical energies that are around. So all the messages we have in our culture about us as women, and as us as older women, and all the personal kind of self-rejections you have, and which you will encounter. I remember going through menopause so clearly, and oh my God, it was excoriating, the way I was saying, holy shit, oh God, sorry, I swear a bit.
You're allowed to.
It was looking at myself. That was hard. It was like all the veils were parting, and I was looking at myself just naked. And naturally, I initially saw what was not great, all the things I'd failed to do. I mean, I was not feeling good. But if you understand that this is the initiation, and if you've done your inner critic work, leading up to menopause, you've got some wherewithal in yourself. What I did have was I had a sense of self in there. I wasn't without resources. This is so important. You are not arriving, you are arriving with some resources in you. You've got something. Although you may forget it in the moment. And then I had friends to remind me. They would remind me of the things I had done, actually, which was really nice. I go, oh, that's right. Yeah, I did this and that. And you have to meet this critical energy, and you have to decide whether what it is saying is true or not. And it is a very, very fierce encounter. And if you're not supported in that encounter, if you don't have allies, if you do not have a context of this being a sacred rite of passage and initiation, it can feel annihilatory. And that's where I think the suicidal ideation comes in, because we feel so defeated. But where there's support, where there's understanding, and if you're properly taught how to meet this figure, this becomes the revelation. You stand up to this figure and something gets unleashed in you. And then the sacred task you have at menopause is to say yes to yourself. And that's a process. And I remember the moment where I went, oh my God, that's who I am. I was walking down the street, and it was just an ordinary day. I was walking down the street and I went, oh my God, that's who I am. And it was so beautiful. It was so lovely. And I thought, I am never going to abandon this self. And it's like you forge something, Maraya, and then you come out of menopause with this alignment. So when you align with yourself, you wrestle with the critic, and you come through and you come into this alignment with yourself. And that alignment becomes this incredible channel to what you are here to serve in the world. And that's what you get on with postmenopause. And I have never been more creative, more productive than I have in my postmenopause years.
I love everything you've said, Alexandra. And I just want to add in a piece here, which is really important. And you said it, but this yes to yourself is, as I'm hearing it, this recognition of who you are. And it's also an acceptance or a claiming of your limits and your fallibility, your humanness. Yeah, that alignment is a real embracing of all of who you are, warts and all, power and all. And this is what, I see in you and all those I know post-menopause, is that they have found peace with themselves. And that really liberates this creativity that Alexandra's talking about. So it's the alignment, and it's the self-acceptance or the self-kindness or the kind of restedness in oneself that is possible to discover at menopause, that is so beautiful when I witness it in older women.
It's potent, powerful, and thank you. Thank you for the work that both of you do, and the container that you hold, and the ways that you empower and educate women all over the world. I'm aware that we have 7 minutes left, and there's this piece that we still haven't necessarily touched on around, well, what if I'm on contraception? Or what do you think about hormone replacement therapy, bioidenticals? And we also haven't talked about Red School at all. So with 7 minutes left, what I'd like is to hand it over to the two of you, and what feels unfinished, what feels unsaid, obviously let listeners know where to go to learn more. I'll make sure to put links to the book and Red School. But where would you like to finish up the rest of this conversation?
let's just address the hormonal thing
Yeah.
quickly,
Mm-hmm.
which is that if you're on hormonal contraception, it is flattening your cycle. We still say practice some form of cycle awareness anyway, but you're not having a menstrual cycle. So, yeah, that's, and yes, so I just want to say that. Now, when it comes to HRT, um, my, I, what you choose, how can I say this? I am not into hormonal anything, as you probably guessed. But what's really crucial for me is that uh, because we're all so unique, we have all sorts of different challenging situations in our lives and different health conditions and bodies and so on. And the thing that's most important to me is that you find your own yes to what you choose to do for your body. So I don't comment on, I mean, HRT does flatten your emotions. It will numb out your experience to some degree. And, but it's, you have your life situation, you have your work, you have your family, you have to make the choices you need to make. I still say if you are taking HRT, learn about this sacred rites of passage anyway. Read our book and just begin to play with the ideas, because there'll be something there that you're feeling absolutely, absolutely. And
Yeah,
to
and actually, oftentimes people turn to hormonal replacement therapy because there is no alternative, there is no context, there is no understanding for what's going on, and we
yes,
find so many uh, people who read our books and this knowledge of the intelligence of the menstrual cycle and the process that's at work in menopause. Once people have understood that, they feel much more held in what they're going through, and they don't feel like they need it in the same way, because there's more acceptance. They get that it's a process. They get that it's okay to be going into the underworld, because this isn't just death for death's sake. This is death that's initiating us into liberation and power, which, very much you would relate to this with childbirth. There's a big difference between experiencing pain that has no context and experiencing the intense feelings of giving birth when it's for birth's sake. It has a very different quality. And, I know for myself, I was able to dig so much deeper in myself with that experience, because I knew it was okay. I knew there was nothing wrong or bad. And the exact same is true with our psychological and emotional process. When we go, okay, there's nothing wrong or bad, I'm not going mad, this is actually normal, what I'm experiencing. And yes, it's hard, but this is as it should be. These are my labor pains for rebirthing myself into my post-menopause life. So really, the education here is so important, and being part of a community who is thinking in this way that really honors our cyclical nature is medicine in and of itself. So to anyone who's listening who actually wants to have the experience more held, I would really recommend you come and check out. We've got lots of free resources at Red School. So just I will name a couple actually. For those of you with a menstrual cycle, we've got a free course called Love Your Cycle. And actually, even if your cycle is irregular, that's still a good thing to do, because it will kind of join the dots for you, or fill in the backstory, or give context to your years of menstruating. So the Love Your Cycle course, which introduces the inner seasons and how to track the menstrual cycle and really gets you inside the experience of your cycle. And then we've got a menopause mini course, which is also free, which sets you up with some basic context for what you're going through, and really gives you some practical tips for actually what the most important things are to tend to in menopause. There's some very practical suggestions we have, which make all the difference. And a lot of that is in our books as well. Mm-hmm. So those are two very good places to go. And then finally, for anyone who is feeling really turned on by this work, and we know there are people out there. I mean, this is a new emerging field, menstruality. that Alexandra and I have been pioneering, together for 15 years, but Alexandra began really over 40 years ago with that menstrual pain from hell. But this new emerging field of menstruality that now we've given language to, we've developed this lexicon which describes the spiritual architecture of women and the journey you go on from menarche to menopause and beyond. If people are feeling really turned on by that and kind of want to be part of this movement, part of the educators, the people who are going to take this out into the world, we offer a menstruality leadership program, which is really a very deep induction into the power of this work, and takes people really through the different maps we teach and helps them to access this power for themselves, to really experience all the things we talk about, because that's where this work really comes alive. It's not in the knowledge, that's very useful, but it's in awakening to it in yourself. So the Menstruality Leadership Program, which starts at the end of March, actually, we do it once a year. That's a good place for you if you're feeling excited by this work.
And it sounds like the Menstruality Leadership Program is also for those that not only want to have the knowledge and the embodiment for themselves, but also be the pioneers and potentially support and lead and educate others.
Exactly. Integrate it into your work, share it with others, make this knowledge a part of what you're doing in the world. Absolutely, yes.
And all of that can be found at redschool.com. Is that
redschool.net?
.net. Okay, redschool.net.
redschool.net. That's right.
And I'll make sure that the team for the podcast get all the individual links to put in the show notes as well.
Right. Yeah.
All right. I know that that time is up and you need to go. I just want to say thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for being here and for our time together, and also for just the ways that you serve women, and which then serves men and serves community and serves the world. Yes. It feels important, and I'm trusting that everyone who's listened, I honor your time. I know we all live productive, full lives, and I know that you've gotten exactly what you needed to receive in the midst of this conversation, and hopefully there's been many aha moments of self-discovery, and I hope that you continue to dig in and dive into these concepts.